Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is brought to you by MX Publishing, with the largest catalog of new Sherlock Holmes books in the world. New novels, biographies, graphic novels, and short story collections about Sherlock Holmes. Find them at mxpublishing.com.
And by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 213, Corporals, Colonels, and Commissionaires.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Well, here we are once again on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, are you fully commissioned for this episode?
I had been out of commission for a while, but now I'm fully commissioned.
Excellent. Well, we want to have you in tip-top working shape because, there will be an inspection later. We'll be checking to see that your bed is firmly and crisply made with military corners and all sorts of other things like that. And your shoes must be shined to code. So make sure everything is set. You do have shoes on.
A challenge because today I'm wearing sneakers, but I expect them to be sparkling.
Okay, well, good. Well, the good news is I'm wearing pants today, which is a change during the pandemic. So, yeah, I know. It's crazy. It's crazy. Well, you don't want to hear about shoes, pants, codes, or beds. You're here to hear about our lovely guests. Before we bring them on, we just want to remind you that this show is available at ihose.co/ihose213, all lowercase. That'll take you directly to the show notes for this episode, where we will have links, including to the book we're talking about, as well as anything else that happens to come up during the show. Make sure you stay tuned after the interview, because we will be doing our Canonical Couplets quiz, where we give you 2 lines of poetry, and you have to figure out which story we're talking about. You will win a prize. What is the prize? Well, you'll just have to stay tuned to see after the interview. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can leave us an email at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. You can call us at 774-221-READ. That's 774-221-7323. Or, of course, you can reach us as I Hear of Sherlock on all of the socials. We appreciate your support, whether it's giving us a rating or review or supporting us by PayPal or Patreon. Every little bit counts to the community of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Well, we have 2 very special guests this time around for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. The first is a Sherlockian, that I've personally known for many years, Marsha Pollak, whose investiture in the BSI is a small but select library. She's general editor for the BSI Professions Series, and of course co-editor of the book we're speaking about today, Corporals, Colonels, and Commissionaires. She's a coordinator of the Baker Street Irregulars Oral History Project, and beginning in 2020 has had the honor of presenting the Standing on the Terrace tribute at the BSI dinner. Her Science Society memberships include 2 of her local Northern California groups, the Scourers and Molly Maguires, and the Knights of the Gnomon. She has guided the oldest profession-oriented scion for more than 35 years, the Sub Librarians scion of the BSI in the American Library Association. She's now retired after 4 decades as a librarian and lives in San Jose. Marsha, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you, Scott and Bert, for inviting me.
Absolutely. Our other guest is Michael Quigley, invested in the BSI as a large brass-bound safe. He's co-editor with Marsha of Corporals, Colonels, and Commissionaires, and Michael has a combined 30 years of service in both the United States Army and the United States Navy. Most recently, he was an active-duty naval intelligence officer in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He is now retired. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Scott. It's great to be here.
And as usual, there is so much more beneath the surface with each of you than these short biographies would indicate. So why don't we delve into this a little more before we get into the book? Because I think we'll find how the roads lead to the book, and we'll certainly want to hear about the lovely topic of the military profession and Sherlock Holmes. So, Marsha, let's start with you. We've known each other for decades, and this is really interesting to me. You are a founder of the Sub Librarians. Talk to us a little bit about what that is and how it even came about.
Oh, my goodness. Well, the Sub Librarians, as you said, is the oldest scion professionally oriented. And it came about with John Bennett Shaw. And doesn't everything go back to John Bennett Shaw? John was a library trustee, and he wanted to bring that into the library field, bring Sherlock Holmes into the library field. And so back in 1967, at the annual meeting that was out here in San Francisco, he and Howard Haycraft got together and founded the Sub Librarians. We have the longest name of any scion that you can imagine.
What's the official name?
That is exactly the official name that you gave. It's the Sub Librarian Scion of the Baker Street Irregulars in the American Library Association.
That's fantastic.
It meets only once a year during the American Library Association. And that meeting travels all over the United States and into Canada, at least into Toronto. And so one of the best things, when I was going to ALA meetings, all of a sudden I saw this Sherlock Holmes group, and I thought, wow, this is great. And sure enough, it was great. And the idea is to have a meeting that brings in library people if there's a local sign, we tried to have a joint meeting, because then you get these library people in with the local Sherlockians, and then they just start talking.
Yeah.
And so I followed in John's footsteps, and then in Francine Morris Swift's footsteps.
Those are great footsteps to follow in. Large footsteps, certainly.
Yes, they are.
Now, not a lot of people realize this, at least people who are maybe only have a passing familiarity with the profession of librarians. There are many, many different professions within the library industry, if I may, that one can take. Now, what path did you choose for your career?
Well, I basically was a public librarian, and I've traveled quite a bit. We've moved quite a bit. So I started off in Buffalo and Erie County Public Library, and I was a children's librarian, a young adult librarian, adult branch manager. Let's see. And then when we went to we went to Florida, we went to Texas. Texas, that was an interesting job because I worked at the Dallas Museum of Art. So I was a cataloger, and I worked with not just the curators, but the public. So somebody would call up and say, I found this painting in my attic. What's it worth? And then when we moved out to California, it was, not always easy to get a job. And so then I went into the academic field because I worked at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. This was a degreed school for just your master's degree. And I had to bring the library up to speed. And it was an experience. I went in to meet the academics, and they introduced me to all the professors. They were all sitting down on the floor. There was no chair, and they didn't ask me to sit down on the floor. I felt really... It was transpersonal psychology, you know. The library was in an old mansion, and the library was in the basement, which was a wine cellar. And so I'm sitting there working. It was great. And all of a sudden I start hearing all these screams. I said, it turns out there's a scream class. I mean, that was the class.
So Marsha, you go into this group. They're sitting on the floor. They don't ask you to sit down. Occasionally there are screams. How long did it take you to discover this was a kindergarten?
Well, probably about a year later, I moved on to a public library in Sunnyvale, California, where I spent the next 20-some years, I'd guess, and that's where I retired from.
Wow. Sunnyvale, California. So did you check out any books for Sergey Brin or any of the great, Sunnyvale entrepreneurs that have grown up in that area since?
I know. I mean, Mountain View is the city right up the street, and that's where Google is. And they funded their bookmobile. So, hey, they was really good.
Great.
That's fantastic. And over the course of those years, Marsha, as you have had the opportunity to engage with many different elements of the public, tell us a little bit about how maybe you snuck Sherlock Holmes into the job.
Well, I probably could have done better about that, but there was always the exhibit of Sherlockian items to try and get people interested. And there was always reader's advisory where, you suggest, people ask you to suggest books, And so there was an opportunity there to put books into children's hands as well as adults' hands. And it was fun. I always loved, you can imagine, reading. And I always read mysteries, so...
And we usually open the show with this. We neglected to do that with you. We're so excited to talk about the library aspect. But tell us about how you first encountered Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, well, as I said, when I was a child, I read, and I read mysteries. And of course, undoubtedly I came across a mystery or two of Sherlock Holmes. But I don't think I really became acquainted with Sherlock Holmes until I saw that there was an adult education class being offered in Buffalo, New York, where we were. This was in 1976. But I couldn't go to it. It was very disappointing. But afterwards, I saw an article in the newspaper saying that the people from that class were getting together to form a group of people who were interested in Sherlock Holmes. So I drove across town. I walked into this meeting, into this room full of people, and that became an Irish secret society at Buffalo. And that was my first sign. And all these different kinds of people were there, and they were all interested in Sherlock Holmes. And so, we just had a lot of fun from that point on. I remember, have you ever gone into a bank, Scott, and asked to set up a bank account for an Irish secret society at Buffalo?
There might be a few questions asked, I can imagine.
There were a few questions.
Wow. Well, that is wonderful. And we are so glad that you have shuffled off from Buffalo to other points. That's fascinating. Well, why don't we move from an Irish secret society to an Irishman himself, Lieutenant Commander Quigley. Michael, how are you?
I'm well, Scott. Thank you. How are you?
Excellent. Well, tell us a little bit about your journey with Sherlock Holmes. When did it first start?
Sherlock Holmes, I was first introduced to Sherlock Holmes by my grandmother, who was from Ireland. She's from County Sligo. And I had a lot of books when I was a young boy, and I used to love to read just about anything. I had a whole series of books. I think they were called My Golden Book On, and like fill in the blank, right? My Golden Book on Abraham Lincoln, or My Golden Book on, American Birds. And when I was 9 years old, at Christmas time, my grandmother had a huge, heavy thing under the Christmas tree for me. And I opened it up, and it was the Baring Gould double volume annotated set, which I still have. That was fascinating to me. Not only was I able to read the stories and see the illustrations, but those marginal comments, all those little annotations, some of them had photographs of real places in Victorian England. And so it brought the stories literally to life. They were historical places, and there were all of these sorts of suppositions and hypotheses that Baring Gould made about what Watson really meant, or who this might have been, and that aspect of it just completely fascinated me, and so it became this world I could enter. It wasn't just a book to read and learn, but it was a world I could enter. And it was the first experience I ever had of having a reading experience where I could sort of immerse myself and go to that place. So that was where I first learned of Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, that's fascinating. And I love the escapism that comes with this. Whether it's introduced to us visually, as so many of those places that you mentioned in the side columns there, or just by virtue of our imagination. Now, the project we're talking about today, of course, is Corporals, Colonels, and Commissionaires. Has to do with the military in the canon, and you come to us with a plethora of military experience. We mentioned in your biography your Army and Navy. Does that make you a Marine? How does that work?
The Marines would not say so, but yes, technically, I suppose, soldiers who get their feet wet are Marines.
Tell us about that journey. How did you find your way into the military, and what path did it take?
Yeah, for as long as I can remember, I have been fascinated and interested in military topics, whether it was military personages, famous generals and so forth, or battles. My father was the president of the New York Civil War Roundtable, New York City, and that was a fairly prestigious organization. And in fact, I believe Bob Katz is a member of it to this day. Also, they give out this is just a little aside, but it's a Sherlockian aside. They give out an award every year to the author of the best book on the Civil War. And that award is called the Fletcher Pratt Award. Fletcher Pratt was one of the founding members in 1951 of the New York Civil War Roundtable. So there's this sort of strange worlds in which we live kinds of things. And my father was also a Sherlockian, ironically.
Well, but tell us about the connection with Fletcher Pratt to our world, because not all of our listeners might know who Fletcher Pratt was.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, Fletcher Pratt, I don't know if he was one of the original. He was certainly one of the early Baker Street irregulars. A good friend of Christopher Morley. He was a noted naval historian and naval games theory strategist. In fact, the Naval War College, where I went for one of my masters, still teaches Fletcher Pratt's theories on naval combat. So Fletcher Pratt is a big name in several circles. He was also a Civil War historian, and as I said, one of the first, or certainly one of the earliest, Baker Street irregulars. So he had many and varied interests, which I think you'll find is emblematic of so many Sherlockians. That's what makes the community so interesting to be a part of. It's not just fans of Sherlock Holmes. It's fans of Sherlock Holmes who also have interests in law and medicine and the military and the Civil War and postage stamp collecting and outer space and all sorts of things. So Yeah, so Fletcher Pratt had his fingers in a lot of pots, and in those early years between the 30s and the 50s, he had helped to found at least two societies, one being Sherlockian and one being a Civil War historians group. And the reason I mentioned this, my dad's involvement with the Civil War Roundtable, is that I used to go with my dad and the members of the Civil War Roundtable to the various battlefield tours that they would give. And growing up in New York City on the East Coast, we weren't that far away from places like Gettysburg or Antietam. And so, again, with the same kind of experience that I had with the Baron Gould, where there's little photographs and little comments where I can enter into this Victorian world, here I was walking the battlefields and being exactly where some monumental event happened. As I grew up, I joined the Civil Air Patrol when I was in high school, when I was 14, where I exercised that interest in the military, and I had a uniform, and I had to cut my hair that way and carry myself in with military, decorum and customs and courtesies. And I just thrived. I loved it. My best friends, some of my best friends to this day, are from my days in Civil Air Patrol way back 30 odd years ago. And then from there, I went into the Army. I think I gravitated toward the Army because of my exposure to so many Civil War battlefields. So I spent, 14 years enlisted in the Army. So they put me out into the inactive reserve for a period of time. And this is why if you get to know me and you hear my stories and you know that I'm in the military for 30 years, but I worked on Star Trek, how does that all jive? Well, it jives because there was a period of time I was on the inactive list, still in the military, technically, but not on active duty. Actually, I really thrived in the military at that point. I had the discipline to commit to studies, and I did some college, and I got good grades and made the dean's list. And I had responsibilities that were invested in me, leadership opportunities that came. At one point, I was a specialist in the Army, sometimes referred to as an E4, pay grade E4, and I was put in charge of a small section of soldiers that included other specialists, other E4s. And there was one E4 who constantly was absent and late, and I had to counsel him and say, look, you can't be late. If you're going to be late, I'm going to have to report you. And he got very upset with me, and he said, you're not an NCO. You don't have any authority over me. But I was in charge of the section, administratively anyway. So I went to the platoon leader, and he said, yeah, we've got a problem. We got to make you an NCO. But I didn't have the time and grade to become a sergeant. So they promoted me laterally to corporal. And corporal is the worst rank in the Army. You have all of the responsibilities of an NCO, none of the pay. You are still paid the same as you were as a specialist, which is the best rank in the Army, by the way, because you have no responsibility. You're treated with a certain level of respect because you know your job, hence the name specialist. And so you have this, you're sort of Teflon, but corporal, I mean, you're treated just like an NCO, and you're expected to participate in all the NCO meetings and so forth. And nobody likes you. The soldiers don't trust you anymore, and the NCOs don't think that you're really an NCO. So it's the worst rank in the Army.
Well, you've had, just an amazing life, and there are many points of contact between your professional experience and the book. You had the experience, as a young man of being a part of this institution who, that provided a fabulous community that took people and gave them skills and training, that taught them how to accomplish things working with other people, that gave them a career path, but also, had a less favorable side, rules and regulations that could fly in the way of, your own personal identity. And, I'm just curious, when you conceived the idea, or when this book Corporals, Colonels, and Commissionaires, when the concept for this was developed as part of the professional series. Did you think about that in terms of a topic that needed some editorial treatment, or did you think about, that aspect of it?
Absolutely. The thing that stood out for me is what the book was really going to be about was about those experiences, the everyday experiences of a soldier or a sailor or a Marine, artilleryman or whatever. It really was about identifying what their life was like. And how that ties to Sherlock Holmes is he's able to pick up on these clues. He knows, your job from the artillery boots that you're wearing, or from the way that you comport yourself, the way you stand. Are you an NCO or were you an officer? And he can tell because the cultures are slightly different on each side of the line between officers and NCOs. So I wanted to make sure that those sorts of stories, that those sorts of experiences made it into the book, because those are the things that triggered Sherlock Holmes in being able to recognize a doctor from Afghanistan from an artilleryman.
And Michael,
Marine sergeant.
Was the idea for this entry in the Professions series, did that originate with you, or how did it come about?
Yeah. Yes and no, I think. I honestly, you'd have to ask people like Bob and Marsha and John Berquist. I remember I had volunteered myself, which is something I should have learned not to do in the military. In fact, we like to joke that Navy stands for never again volunteer yourself. But I remember I volunteered an idea. I said to, I think it was Bob Katz, I said, I have an idea for a book in the Professions series. And at the time, there was only one book in the Professions series, the Nerve and Knowledge. And I had an idea for government, right? The military and intelligence and diplomats and politicians, sort of all of that inclusive. I didn't really think about having a book that was focused on the military. And I still have ideas for that. I've talked with Marsha about that, so maybe I will be invited back. But I actually got the impression when I mentioned it to Bob and others that they were like, yeah, okay, great idea. Get away from me, kid. You're bothering me. I hadn't heard anything. So I figured, okay, well, there's probably a group within the BSI that are sort of, they're on the editorial staff. They're the ones that are going to be asked to edit books and so forth. And I hadn't heard anything. And then all of a sudden I got a phone call or an email from Bob saying that they want me to co-edit Corporals, Colonels, and Commissionaires. They had the working title already in hand, and they wanted it to be focused on the military. And I thought, okay, great. Well, I know something about that. So I was excited, but by that point, I had convinced myself that I wasn't going to be asked to edit a book, but when you least expect it.
Yeah, I guess so. Now, you mentioned the name Bob in passing there. Could you elucidate on that?
Sure. Yeah, I always take for granted that the Sherlockian community is small enough to know everybody, but it's actually large enough where people may not. Bob Katz is the Bob in question here. What about Bob is Bob Katz.
Yes. Well, he's been on the show a number of times. He, of course, has handled a lot of the BSI Press work and co-edited a number of volumes with Andy Solberg. Now, there is another B that we wish to discuss with you, and that B is Bill, standing for Bill Mason. Bill was initially involved in this project with you as a co-editor. Can you walk us through that story? And we would love to hear how Marsha came into it too, which we will bring Marsha back up for.
Yeah. Well, Bob had mentioned to me that it would be a co-editor, and they had not yet settled on who that would be, who the co-editor would be. And I said, I had some suggestions, and he said, well, there's people that are looking into that. So again, I just, sat back and waited to hear back. And they came back and they said, your co-editor is going to be Bill Mason. And I really didn't know Bill Mason all that well. So he and I scheduled a few phone calls sort of to get to know each other and find out a little bit about each other's backgrounds. And he has this incredible background in both government service on the civilian side and also journalist service and being an editor at a newspaper. He worked in a newspaper. And so I was thrilled because here's a man that understands the editorial process. And that isn't necessarily my background. So I was really excited to be working with somebody who knew what they were doing when it came to editing a book. And we got started fairly early. We got started in 2018 is when all of this started. We started to talk amongst ourselves about what we wanted the book to include. What sort of essays would we want to read? Where the military and Sherlock Holmes was concerned. And so we started to do that. And we wrote down these ideas for essays. And then we came up with people that we thought would make good authors for that particular essay. And we came down, we worked together on putting together an authors list that we would like to approach. And one by one, we started to reach out to those people. And if I had a closer relationship with one author, I would be the one that would handle that communication. And if Bill had a better relationship with somebody, he would take care of those authors. And that's how we divided the labor. Bill also had a phenomenal idea. And I think that other co-editors of future books might find this useful. We started very, very early. And as we said, and one of the things that Bill knew was bound to happen was that people were going to drop out. For one reason or another, life gets in the way, legitimately. Other things, other people are going to forget about it. They're going to say yes, 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 and they're going to forget about it. And by the time they realize that they're on the hook for this book, they're going to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't do that." So what we did, Bill put together a contract, an author's contract with each author. And we gave it to the authors, and they understood that they were responsible for this essay, and they had all the time in the world. We gave them 2 years to get their stuff together. And we would check back periodically, so it would not slip through the cracks. Every so often, we would check back. Either we would do a group email, letting everybody know that we're on track or what the timelines are, or we would do person-to-person emails and just see if there's anything that author needs from us to help them with their essay. And it worked beautifully because the authors were in constant contact with us throughout the process.
Bill didn't think to put an editor's contract together, did he?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Because he eventually had to leave the project for whatever reasons.
Yes.
But thankfully, we have a series editor in Marsha Pollak. And Marsha, this is really fascinating to me because, in our hobby here, we look at what people do professionally. We look at what their interests are. We try to combine the many. It's not even two. We combine the many and come up with something that is ingenious for our little hobby. And in as much as you early on were involved with a professions-based Sherlockian society, the Sub Librarians that we talked about just earlier, it stands to reason that you would be the professions editor for the series. Did that come naturally?
Well, this happened quite a long time ago. I think you get the idea that it takes a long time to have a book in the pipeline. And it was actually Michael Keane who asked me to become the Professions Series editor. And I wondered if I really could do this. But I accepted. And Michael, at that point, he was co-publisher of the Baker Street Irregulars Press. And he was the one that actually came up with some of the first ideas for the book, the series of books. And when Nerve and Knowledge came out, it was like, wait a minute, this is a profession. I think we've got a series here. And Michael Keene came up with several ideas, possibilities. And when he asked me to be the series editor, it was so that the series editor could, I don't know, get the topics, get the editors, and make sure everything just really went through and everything came out right. And I think, Michael, it was actually Michael Keene who was the one that approached you, because this is before Bobcats took over that position.
That could be, yes. Thank you.
Because this was back, in late 2016 when I came on board. And I know in January, Michael was sending you emails and saying, because he had gotten your suggestion about spies and intelligence in the canon, and said, I don't think that we're ready for that quite now. But I've got this other project in the works. And now Marsha Pollak is the series editor, and you can work with her and get in touch with her and see if this, what will happen. And so that's when we started emailing and going forward with this project. And you told me you were still interested. And at the time, Michael Keene had done so much work. He had already had a lot of topics for this book that he thought would be good, which I shared with you. And then you sent me back another whole list of topics. Well, I think this and this and this we should have too. And it was just great. And so I did. I asked you to be the co-editor. And the book did have a few turns. And it was several months later before I asked Bill Mason to be the co-editor. And it was, just as Michael Quigley has said, a perfect match.
That's wonderful.
Oh, they had such a great, they each had knowledge and expertise that meshed perfectly together. Yeah.
Well, we're fortunate that they launched it and then, returned it to your capable hands, Marsha. And now we have this fine publication in our hands.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
The way I see it, if you're going to build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
Well, that's exactly what the Wessex Press has done. Built a time machine in style to take you back to 1986 and the first issues of the Sherlock Holmes Review. Groundbreaking interviews with Jeremy Brett and Peter Cushing. Rare reprints from the Strand magazine, like A Day with Dr. Conan Doyle and a profile of William Gillette as Sherlock Holmes. All 4 issues of Volume 1, almost impossible to find today, can be yours, reprinted in a handsome 7x10 volume. Take a trip back to the Sherlockian fever of the 1980s. With the Sherlock Holmes Review Anthology, Volume 1, available right now at wessexpress.com.
I wanted to just kind of debate something with you, Michael, or at least understand your take on things. In your introduction of the book, where you mention that there's a profession series here, you say, but is being a soldier a profession in the same way that being a physician is? As mentioned above, soldiers come from all walks of life. They include some of the most and least educated people in society. It would be easy to think of the military as a collection of occupations rather than a profession in its own right. Now, where do you come down on that? Is the military a profession?
Well, I believe it is. Going forward from that point in the introduction as I go into why I think it is a profession, and I'll leave it to the readers to get to read that introduction for those points. But the reason why it is not a collection, the military is not a collection of occupations with a hodgepodge of different parts of members of society, and rather it is a focused profession, is because there is one objective in the military. The military is to win wars. If you cut it down to its baseline. This is also a reason why when the Army sends you to basic training, you may have enlisted to be an aircraft mechanic, or you may have enlisted to be a musician, Army bandsman, but you're going to learn how to be an infantryman at the beginning of your career. No matter what your job is, no matter what your occupation is, you're going to learn how to fire a weapon. You're going to learn how to use a compass. You're going to learn how to march and take orders and give orders and stand in formation and all of those things. Because at the root, every one of you is a soldier first, aircraft mechanic second. Marines take this to a very high degree. Everybody is a qualified rifleman. Not everybody in the Army is a qualified infantryman. They are trained as infantry. They're familiar with weapons and infantry tactics, but they're not a qualified infantryman. Only the infantrymen that go on to make that their profession are. But the Marines, they do. Every single Marine, regardless of what their job is, whether they're officer or enlisted, every single one of them is a qualified rifleman. And so this idea that the profession of arms is what we're talking about is a profession, because it focuses the attentions, it focuses the training, it focuses the skills and abilities of its component members to one objective, and that objective is winning wars.
So when you think about Watson going into the Army, he was a medical man first. I don't think there's an indication that he went that he intended on going into the military and happened to go to medical school along the way. It was him being a doctor. Or am I mistaken? He says he's an Army doctor, but do we have any evidence that he got his doctorate while enlisted or while being commissioned in the Army?
That's an excellent question. In the military, we do make certain distinctions. Usually within the officer levels, we have something that we call line officers and something we call staff officers. Now, a line officer would be the people who are experts in the branch of service that they're in, and in the particular branch within that branch, whether they're cavalry or artillery or whatever, and they can take command, and they would be expected to progress through those military chains accordingly. On the staff side of the equation, staff officers are where we try to take other professions and incorporate those professions into the military. So here you're going to find things like doctors and lawyers and chaplains, because they have a profession all unto themselves, which require certain licensing and training and experience and education. And so those people, those staff officers, are actually members of two professions at once. They are focusing their professions as a doctor or a lawyer or what have you on the military, and making it possible for the military profession to carry out its objective of winning wars. So Watson became a military surgeon because obviously during war, you're going to have wounded, and also you're going to have illness. In the Civil War, we talked about earlier, the American Civil War, more soldiers died from illness than from combat injuries. So again, doctors are extremely important in the military profession. Whether or not Watson went to the Army because he wanted to take his doctor experience and apply it to a military clientele, or if rather he used the Army to help him get his doctor's profession underway, I think it's the latter. He went to school at Netley. He did obtain a doctoral degree, but he went to Netley. He wasn't drafted. He went there willingly. So I think that he understood that getting set up in business as a doctor in the 1880s wasn't something you could just put out your shingle and expect to be successful. And I think we see that in Resident Patient. We see the struggles of starting your own practice in Resident Patient. So I think that Watson got one step ahead of that and said, what can I do to sort of build my experience? And he joined the Army, and that's where he started.
Have you noticed that the direct-to-consumer market has made it easier than ever to get items you love delivered to you on a regular basis? It could be a monthly subscription to a newspaper, laundry detergent, or razor blades, and you can depend on getting what you need without fail every month. Well, what if you could do the same thing with Sherlock Holmes books? That's exactly what MX Publishing has introduced, the Sherlock Holmes Book Club. With their monthly subscription, you'll be able to get a regular delivery of volumes from the MX book of new Sherlock Holmes stories. Fans can choose from a monthly subscription or a full year up front for a small discount. If you're planning on reading any of the new Sherlock Holmes stories from MX Publishing, this is an affordable and reliable way to get your fix. Just go to ihose.co/MXBookClub and sign up today. That's all lowercase, ihose.co/MXBookClub. Try it this month.
Well, I'd like to say, too, though, there is a great chapter in our book that actually Bill Mason wrote called The Old Campaigner. And he posits that after Watson did get his degree, that normally, as he said, a freshly minted doctor normally goes into private practice. But Watson didn't. And why is that? And yes, could be exactly what Michael is saying, but Bill also brings up the point that Watson did not have any income. He did not have money that he could put towards going into private practice. So he enlisted, so to speak, and went to Netley, because that was a job where it would get him established, and it was a dependable place to work and an honorable place to work. So I think that's one of the things that Bill had in his article that was really good.
Yeah, Marsha, you make a great point about Bill's article here, and it's something I think we should underscore for listeners. There are people who are listening to this who will probably say to themselves, the military, okay, that's fine. I'm not really all that interested in, reading a book about the military and Sherlock Holmes. But the wonderful thing about the way the editorial is put together here is that you do go through 4 or 5 areas that are really relevant to a very wide audience here. So, for example, the book starts with a section where we've got writing by Cliff Goldfarb and by Dan Stashower, one of the premier biographers of Arthur Conan Doyle, about Conan Doyle, the literary agent, and what his connections to the military might be. And with Conan Doyle, of course, that's pretty substantive. And then you have a section about the military itself in the time of Sherlock Holmes, the structure and the operation. Then a section about Watson, which you just referred to in Bill Mason's story. And then the military characters of the canon, with articles by Regina Stinson and Jeff Bradway and Ross Davies and Monica Schmidt, military themes, and then appendices where, you can get some recommended reading. So there's a lot going on here. How did the editorial structure develop? Because I think it's really very, very effective.
I think that structure was set up by Michael and Bill Mason to have those divisions. And it was quite brilliant. I have to agree. And it just makes the book so interesting, too, to go from section to section. And don't forget, too, that Phil Burgum did this unbelievable glossary of military terms. I think when we read the canon, the military is throughout. I mean, from the first pages in studying Scarlet, you are hit with military. And whereas you may know exactly what's going on, your military history may not be as good as Michael Quigley's. And so Phil Burgum has taken all of these military terms and put them in this glossary, and you can refer to them when you are reading the stories, and I think it will make it a much richer experience for you. So just one more thing that this book does, aside from different theories that it puts forth. I mean, Bill also was wondering about Watson's trip home on the troop ship Orontes. And by the way, the Orontes was a naval ship of the time. In fact, Matthias Bostrom writes about it from the point of view of the actual ship's logbook. Now, how brilliant was that? I mean, to step you through from the logbook on what Watson might have, what his experiences were too. I mean, well, so many good articles, so many good essays. You can't really go wrong in this book.
Well, and, you know, when you think about it too, I mean, it's not as if we ought to consider the military as something that is inconsequential to the canon. Quite the contrary. It is central to the Sherlockian canon. I mean, it gave us Watson, for one. I mean, this is late of the annals of John H. Watson of the Army Medical Department. But Bert, you have an essay in here, and you even note that the only naval officer mentioned was in A Study in Scarlet, right? Arthur Charpentier.
Charpentier.
Yes,
so,
poor old Charpentier.
From the very beginning of the canon, all the way through the casebook, where there's a story with soldier in the title, the blanched soldier, right? So it's bookending the entire set of works, plus everything in between that we come across. I mean, military life is central to the Sherlock Holmes canon.
That's exactly right. I mean, we start in The Study in Scarlet, and we go all the way to the wartime service of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah,
really.
If I could just interject here, the audience that Arthur Conan Doyle was writing for, the people of Victorian England, they were much more familiar with military terms than current day populaces are. So because they all had members of their family in the military, it was a very likely thing to from every class of society. You know, from the very wealthy who have second sons in the officer corps to the very poor who have really few options other than that. The military was pervasive in the society, and there's no better example of that Arthur Conan Doyle is assuming a certain level of knowledge on behalf of his reader than the term commissionaire. One of my favorite essays, and one of my favorite essays to ask to be written, was Catherine Cook's essay on commissionaires. I mean, it's in the title of our book. We cannot have a book that doesn't mention what a commissionaire is, and I would bet that most people have no idea really what a commissionaire is. They have an idea of the function based on the content of the context of the book, of the stories, but from where do they come? You know, who are these people, and what makes them commissionaires? And Catherine Cook, when I asked her, she didn't know either. I was expecting, you know, I knew that essay had to be written on that side of the pond. I mean, there was just not the research opportunities were just not here. I knew that had to be done in London. And I was surprised that the term commissionaire hadn't sort of been passed on from generation to generation. It had fallen out of use. And Catherine, you know, was really excited about learning more about who these people are. And she, with full gusto that only Catherine Cook can bring to research, she found so many articles and images and records about the Commissionaires and the Corps of Commissionaires, about how they are largely they were invalided soldiers that were sent back, but they were also sort of bonded in a way. They had a level of trust, we might call it a security clearance. So they were sort of bonded so that you could hire them and know that you had an honorable person and of highest integrity that you can rely on to work in your offices or your building. And our book goes through all of these things that that Arthur Conan Doyle would have assumed you to know, and the structure. As you say, it's not an accident. We tried to go from the macro to the micro, and we started with Arthur Conan Doyle himself. He is a military man. He had military proclivities. He served in the Boer War. So we wanted to make sure that we start this book with his own experiences and his own thoughts about the military, and then bring it into the time. What was the military like in those times? And then, of course, who's our favorite and the principal military character, of course, is Watson. And then there were other military characters of lesser renown, but no less important, like Sub Lieutenant Charpentier. And then we have the military themes, terms that we may not be familiar with. And of course, Phil Burgum's excellent glossary of terms that really is a reference, as Marsha says, that you can have a bedside as you're reading the stories and you come across a term, you can reference it there and follow along and know what's happening. So,
and I'd like to say too, with Catherine Cook, I just want to chime in that, of course, Catherine is a librarian, and a librarian does know how to do research. And one of the things she found in the archives of the Westminster City Archives, actually, were 3 actual Commissionaires documents, contracts, and one of them worked as a library attendant at the Victoria Library, and that's one of the libraries Catherine worked at. So she could stand at the exact window and look out and imagine that this actual commissionaire whose contract she had found had done the same thing in that same spot. Priceless.
Amazing. Well, this is a fascinating book filled with fascinating tales and essays. There is so much more to learn from it. We can't recommend it highly enough for anyone who is interested in, even remotely interested in, the canon and military. It's a must-read. It's a must-read. Anything else before we let you go, Michael and Marsha?
Well, I just want to say thank you to Bob Katz, because he did take over from Michael Keene and helped shepherd this book along with John Bergquist. And they did ask me to be the co-editor when Bill had to step away. And I was very grateful. I was very proud to do it. And I loved working with all the authors. They were, including Bert. They all welcomed me. They sat for all my questions back and forth about all of these essays. And it was just a wonderful experience. And, I thank Bob and I thank John Bergquist for giving me the opportunity, and to Michael Quigley, who welcomed me too. And it was a hard thing, I know, because with Bill leaving, but he was wonderful inviting me in to that spot. So thank you.
And to piggyback on Marsha's appreciation to Bob and Michael Caine and Phil, and I have to mention Bill Mason. Bill Mason's spirit is in this book. Working with Bill Mason was an education for me. I learned a lot about putting together something like this, an anthology, and working as an editor. the structure that you mentioned is largely influenced by Bill's expertise. I still would like to see a espionage, intelligence professionals and diplomats and so forth, and I would love to work with Bill on something like that. Wink, wink. But I think there are great things in store for the Professions series. One of my favorite series, along with the manuscript series and so forth. I think it's going to be one of the cornerstones of BSI Press. It is so fascinating to learn not only about my own profession, but from other professions, canon law or nerve and knowledge. It's just wonderful to sort of be able to encounter these things. So I really hope that there are future volumes, and I look forward to reading them. And if they'll have me back, I look forward to working on another. Thank you.
That's excellent. Well, Michael, we will look forward to that espionage book. And if I can just recommend a title, since it is Sherlock Holmes, the ultimate in ratiocination, I would go with Thinker, Soldier, Sailor, Spy.
Well, that's a good one, but I actually have a title in mind, Scott. Would you like to hear it?
Please.
Diplomatic Secrets.
Tell me more.
That's pretty good.
Well, I mean, I my vision for the book is...
Oh, you're supposed to say, Michael, you're supposed to say, I would, but then I'd have to kill you.
Well, okay, I would, but then I'd have to kill you.
There you go.
No, but that's the idea, is to look at politicians, diplomats, and intelligence professionals, and look at that as a combined profession.
Yeah, well, we will look forward to that. Hopefully that is something that the BSI Press will be working on for years to come. Michael, Marsha, thank you so much for being part of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's my honor.
It's a great conversation, and it's a great book. It's a place where you can go to find out were there really units like the 5th Numberland Fusiliers, and where are all those places in India and Afghanistan, and what's a Jezeel bullet, and what about Corporal Henry Wood, and all of this. But we didn't tell anybody about the beautifully attractive dust jacket, which features the Victorian Kandahar medal, but also the beautiful book, which is bound in a beautiful military green with a gold embossed helmet from
look at
Her Majesty's forces in India. It's a lovely
pith helmet, as it were. Yeah.
Yes, beautifully produced.
It is a lovely, lovely work.
Book. And it's worth your presence on your shelf.
It is. Even
though I have an essay.
Well, I wanted to talk to you about that because here we have your interest in military history. I know you've gone up to Newport a number of times to the Naval War College up there, and the Victorian, is it the Victorian Military Society?
Yes, the Victorian Military Society.
What is that?
A wonderful group. Well, it's headquartered in the UK, and it's dedicated to remembering, writing about, researching, celebrating Her Majesty's military. And the only American branch of that was established by Captain Howard S. Brown back in the 1970s. And I've been going there almost as long as it started. We used to meet at the Newport Artillery, and for years met at the Newport Reading Room. But we meet somewhere in Newport, and there are a lot of people from the Naval War College who are members of that group. And in later, generally, we'll put it this way. If anybody's interested in learning more about it, just, ping me an email and I'll be happy to tell you more about it. But we meet once a year, usually on the first Friday night in February, except, of course, during the pandemic season. So looking forward to getting back to regular meetings.
Well, that's good. That is good. So just if you're interested in that, just email us at comment@ihearofsherlock.com, and we will get that over to Bert. Well, of course you recognize that music. That means it is once again time for everyone's favorite Sherlockian quiz program. That's right. It's Canonical Couplets, where we give you 2 lines of poetry, and you get to guess which story we're referring to. If you were here with us last time in episode 212, we gave you this clue. Weary after months of work, no need for an apology. For 25 deductions by a master of graphology. Bert, do you know the name of the Sherlock Holmes story we were referring to?
Oh, yes. That was one of the first of the adventures. That's the adventure about the frozen salesman at an estate sale.
Uh-oh.
That's the auctioneer's numb.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bert, but no, you've undone it again. No, this time we were going for the Reigate Squire or the Reigate Puzzle. Either one would have sufficed. So, well, if that is the case, that means we need to delve into our Bucket O entries, and we will first. What we need to do is, I guess, we need to give the big prize wheel a spin. Round it goes, and it lands on lucky number 28. Number 28, and that is Bruce Harris. Congratulations. All right. Well, we will be sending out a copy of, well, what was our prize last time? I don't even remember. Well, this is embarrassing.
Well, it's a good question. I don't remember.
Oh, yes. We have the Conan Doyle Society pin, the Literary Agents pin.
Oh, right.
Going out to you. So congratulations on that. Very special prize indeed. Now, this time around, we have a piece of ephemera from the iHose vaults. It is a mystery gift, keeping in the spirit of Michael's espionage recommendation. But we do have some wonderful things that have come in, thanks to donors from all around the world, and we thank you for that. Tony Quattrochi, in particular, has been sending us things. But we will have something from the archives there. But first, you will have to guess this canonical couplet. Another case we'll never know, this time in Rotherhithe. Thanks to Mrs. Hudson, Watson helps Holmes back to life. If you know the answer to this canonical couplet, put it in an email addressed to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If you are among all of the correct answers submitted and we pick you at random, you will win. Good luck. Well, Bert, I can't believe it. We have done it again.
It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. You know, this is so much fun. Why don't we begin it all over again?
Well, let's do that in about 15 days' time. We are here the 15th and 30th of every month. And if you haven't yet checked out our weekly program, it's about 20 minutes long. It's called Trifles, where we look at some of the minutiae in the Sherlock Holmes stories. We'd love to welcome you over there. If you're not yet subscribed or following us on whatever podcatcher of choice, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please go ahead and do so. And, hey, try this. With your smart speaker, say, play the latest episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. You'll be amazed at what happens.
Say, I should mention to you, I didn't mention this earlier, but the next volume of the Baker Street Irregulars Professions Series is one that I've offered to write an essay for, but they haven't gotten back to me. This one is going to be about procrastinators.
Well, the good news is the Procrastinators Anonymous meets the day after tomorrow. I'll see you there. In the meantime, I'm sorry?
Maybe if I get around to it.
Perhaps. I'll put it on the agenda.
Yeah.
Well, in the meantime, I am the always procrastinating Scott Monty.
And I'm the punctured, not punctual Burt Wolder.
And together we say, the game's afoot.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.